The click of the shutter was the only sharp sound in a world of soft, damp ones. Elias Thorne adjusted the tripod, his breath fogging in the chilled air of the marrow root forest. Everything was muted here. The moss on the trees drank the light, the thick carpet of humus drank the sound. He was framing a shot of an ancient oak, a Goliath whose bark was a road map of centuries. He squinted through the viewfinder, adjusting the focus ring. The bark was a chaos of fissures and ridges, a beautiful, abstract texture. He was about to press the shutter again when he saw it. He pulled his eye away, blinked, looked again. It was nothing, a trick of light and shadow, pareidolia, his old friend, his old ghost. Two deep knots for eyes, a twisted scar of a mouth, a long, vertical crack forming the bridge of a nose. It looked like a face, contorted in a silent, wooden scream. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Still, he leaned in closer. The texture was all wrong. It wasn't just suggestive of a face. The lines flowed with an unnerving anatomical logic. The brow was furrowed in a way that implied muscle beneath. The lips were peeled back from imagined teeth. "Stop it, Illy." He backed away, raising the camera again. Through the lens, it was even more pronounced, a portrait of agony carved by time. He took the picture. The click echoed, louder this time. It sounded like a bone snapping. Back in the small, rented cabin that smelled of pine sap and mildew, Elias worked. The laptop's glow was a lonely island in the encroaching dusk. He imported the day's photos, the progress bar a slow crawl. He was a man running from noise, from the relentless digital churn of the city, from the AI art that he felt was making his life's work obsolete. This project, primeval, he called it, was his rebuttal, something real, something true. The photo loaded, the one of the face, his breath hitched. On the high-resolution screen, it was undeniable. The detail was surgical. He zoomed in. The pixels resolved into fine grains of bark, moss, and lichen. But zoomed out, it was a man's face, middle-aged, gaunt, screaming. It wasn't a carving. It looked grown, like a tumor with a soul. A floorboard creaked on the porch. Elias froze, every muscle tensing. He wasn't expecting anyone. The cabin was miles from the nearest road. He crept to the window, peering through the grimy glass. There was nothing but the dense, black wall of the trees standing like silent sentinels. He dismissed it, an animal, the house settling. But the feeling of being watched bored into the back of his neck. He couldn't sleep. The image of the face was burned onto the back of his eyelids. He found a flask of whiskey and took a long, burning swallow. In the cabin's small bookshelf, tucked between field guides, was a thin, leather-bound journal left by a previous tenant, or perhaps many tenants ago. The cover was blank. The pages were filled with a cramped, spidery script. He flipped it open. It was a makeshift log of the forest, observations, sketches of leaves, and stranger things. "The wind has a voice here," one entry read. "It doesn't whistle through the branches. It hums, a low, constant thrum you feel more in your teeth than your ears." Elias paused, listening. Beyond the hum of the refrigerator, there it was, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to be coming from the ground itself. He'd noticed it before, but dismissed it as tinnitus. He read another entry dated years earlier. The locals call it the marrow root. They say people don't get lost here, they get planted. Elias snorted, closing the journal, folklore, campfire stories for tourists. He tossed it on the table, but the word echoed in his mind, planted. A notification pinged on his laptop. The slow Wi-Fi had finally uploaded one of his photos to a private cloud backup. It was the face. He stared at it, the whiskey simmering in his stomach. Driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he opened a facial recognition search engine and dropped the image in. It was a pointless, absurd gesture, the engine whirred. Searching. He expected no results found, a picture of tree bark. Instead, a result appeared. It was a grainy, black and white photograph from an old newspaper clipping. A missing person report from 1958, a man named Samuel Keene, a hiker who had entered the Marrow Root Forest and never returned. The face in the photograph and the face in the bark were identical. Elias felt the cabin's temperature drop 10 degrees. The hum from the forest outside seemed to grow louder, a deep, resonant note that vibrated through the soles of his feet. A greeting. The next morning was unnaturally bright, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in sharp, accusatory beams. Sleep had offered no escape, only feverish dreams of roots coiling around his limbs. Armed with his camera and a growing sense of dread, Elias marched back into the Marrow Root. He wasn't a photographer anymore. He was an investigator, a witness. He found the first tree again. The face of Samuel Keene was still there, locked in its wooden scream. But now that he knew what to look for, he started seeing others. Everywhere. A smaller face on a birch, its bark peeling like sunburnt skin, the expression one of terrified confusion. A woman's profile on a towering pine, her eyes closed, a single line of hardened sap tracing a path down her cheek like a permanent tear. They weren't just faces, they were portraits, each one unique, each one in agony. He spent the day frantically documenting them. His pareidolia was now a finely tuned instrument of horror. He saw them on trees dozens of yards away, their silent suffering calling to him. He filled a memory card, then another. He felt a manic energy, the thrill of discovery warring with a primal, gut-wrenching fear. He stumbled upon a clearing, a circle of ancient, moss-covered stones at its center. In the middle of the circle stood a single, colossal redwood. Its bark was different. It wasn't just one face, it was a writhing tapestry of them. Hundreds of faces, one melting into the next, a grotesque collage of stolen lives, men, women, children. Their features stretched and distorted, woven together into the flesh of the tree. It was a monument, a tomb. At the base of the tree he saw something glinting. He knelt, his fingers brushing away the damp soil. It was a small silver locket, tarnished but intact. He pried it open. Inside was a faded photo of a smiling young girl. The cabin's weak internet connection became his lifeline and his tormentor. He cross-referenced the photo from the locket with online archives of local missing persons. He found her in less than a minute. Lily Ann Weatherby, vanished in 1993. She was last seen picking wildflowers near the edge of the Marrow Root. He looked from the smiling girl on the screen to the photos he had just taken. He found her face almost instantly on a slender maple near the edge of the clearing. The expression wasn't a scream. It was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He was standing in a graveyard where the headstones wore the faces of the buried. That night, the humming intensified. It wasn't just in his teeth anymore, it was inside his skull, a deep, cellular vibration. He barricaded the door with a heavy armchair, though he didn't know what he was trying to keep out. He pulled up one of the new photos on his laptop, zooming in on the bark around a face. He saw something he hadn't noticed before. The wood grain. It didn't look like normal grain. It looked fibrous, like muscle tissue or capillaries. He grabbed a utility knife from his bag, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had to know. This was the precipice of madness, and he had to jump. He opened the cabin door and ran into the oppressive dark, armed with a knife and a flashlight. The forest watched him come. He found the nearest tree with a face, a man with a thick beard and eyes wide with shock. The beam of his flashlight made the shadows in the bark writhe. His hand trembled as he raised the knife. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the tree, to the man. He jabbed the knife into the cheek of the face. It wasn't like cutting wood. There was a sickening, rubbery resistance, like plunging a blade into dense flesh. He twisted the knife. A thick, dark liquid oozed from the cut. It was deep red, almost black in the flashlight's glare, and it smelled sweet, cloyingly sweet, like overripe fruit and iron. Sap, it had to be sap, but it ran down the bark like blood. Elias collected a sample in a small, empty water bottle. Back in the cabin, under the harsh glare of a single bulb, he stared at the viscous liquid. His mind, trained to see patterns and details, was racing, connecting impossible dots. He had a travel-sized digital microscope in his camera kit for examining fine details in nature. A gimmick, he'd thought. He prepared a slide, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He placed it under the lens and connected the microscope to his laptop. He focused the image. He saw plant cells, chloroplasts, the normal architecture of tree sap, but there was something else. Floating among the plant matter were other cells, smaller, rounder, lacking a cell wall, and in the center of each one a nucleus. They were red blood cells and platelets. Human DNA suspended in the lifeblood of the tree. This was the first piece of true foreshadowing of the ultimate twist. He didn't understand it. How could human DNA be inside a tree? A parasitic fungus, a bizarre, unknown form of contamination. His mind scrambled for a rational explanation, a scientific foothold in a world that was rapidly turning to quicksand. He thought of the journal. They say people don't get lost here, they get planted. He had laughed. He wasn't laughing now. The word planted echoed with a new biological horror. You plant a seed, you give it soil, water, you let it grow, become part of the landscape. His stomach churned. He ran to the sink and retched. He had to leave. Now, he didn't care about his project, his equipment. He threw his laptop and the sample into a backpack, grabbed his car keys, and burst out of the cabin. The forest was utterly black, the moon and stars smothered by the thick canopy. His car was parked 50 yards away, a metal shell of safety in this suffocatingly organic world. He fumbled with the keys, his fingers numb and useless. He finally got the door open and threw himself inside, locking it with a convulsive slam. He jammed the key into the ignition. turned, a click, nothing more. He tried again, click, the battery was dead, completely, utterly dead. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel, a choked sob escaping his throat. A sound answered him from the woods, not a growl, not a scream. It was a low, resonant hum, the same hum from the journal, from the earth, from inside his own skull. But now it had a quality he hadn't noticed before, a deep, resonant, and utterly ancient sense of welcome. Panic gave way to a cold, sharp-edged clarity. The car was dead. The forest didn't want him to leave. Fine. The main road was only 5 miles away, he thought. A 2-hour walk, maybe. He could do that. He could outrun a forest. He grabbed his most powerful flashlight and his backpack and started walking down the dirt track he'd driven in on. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like grasping fingers. The faces in the bark were invisible in the darkness, but he felt their eyes on him. Hundreds of silent witnesses. He walked for what felt like an hour, his light cutting a nervous path through the oppressive gloom. He should have been nearing the road. Instead, he saw the faint glimmer of a light through the trees ahead. It was the light he'd left on in his cabin. He had walked in a perfect circle. He tried again. He marked a tree with his knife, a deep X, and walked in the opposite direction. He was a photographer. He had a good sense of direction. He was meticulous. He paid attention to the light, the slope of the land. 45 minutes later, he was standing in front of a tree with a freshly carved X on its trunk. The forest was a maze. A living, breathing labyrinth that was actively reconfiguring itself around him. This realization hit him not with a bang, but with a cold, sinking dread. He wasn't lost. He was contained. This was his small discovery. He wasn't going crazy, and it wasn't just ghosts. This was an active, intelligent force. He thought this knowledge gave him power, a target to fight against. This was his trap, the belief that he could fight it at all. He retreated to the cabin, the only place that felt remotely safe. He needed a new plan. He found an old topographical map of the region in the journal. It showed a river cutting along the northern edge of the forest. If the paths were changing, the river wouldn't be. It was his only way out. Hope, fragile but fierce, rekindled in his chest. He would wait for sunrise and then head north. He could follow the river downstream to civilization. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a win. He had a plan. He was smarter than the trees. He allowed himself a moment of rest, slumping into the armchair. He felt a strange lethargy creeping over him. The humming of the forest was almost soothing now. A lullaby, just a few minutes, he thought. Just close your eyes for a minute. He woke with a gasp. It was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window. He had slept in the chair all night. He felt strangely refreshed, too refreshed. He stood up and felt a sharp pain in his foot. He looked down. During the night, he must have kicked over the sample bottle he'd left on the floor. It had shattered, and a shard of plastic was embedded in the sole of his hiking boot. He pulled it out, a small cut already scabbing over, but the wound was stained a dark, rusty brown. The sap. The sap with the blood in it. It had gotten into his system. He felt a wave of dizziness. The humming in his head was back, but different now. It was no longer an external noise. It was a voice. No, not a voice. It was a chorus of thoughts, memories, feelings. They weren't his. Lily's terror as she realized the path home was gone. Samuel's frustration as his compass spun uselessly. 100 other lives, 100 other moments of panic and resignation, all flowing into him like a river. The forest was inside him now. Reality began to fray at the edges. He looked at his hands, and for a terrifying second, the skin seemed translucent, the veins beneath looking like tiny, dark roots. He stumbled outside into the light. The forest looked different. The colors were more vibrant, the greens deeper, the browns richer. He could feel the slow, inexorable pull of water from the soil up through the trees. He could feel the sunlight on the leaves, not as warmth, but as energy. As food, the faces in the bark turned to follow him as he walked. Their expressions were changing. The agony was still there, but it was being replaced by something else, a vast, placid emptiness. He heard a whisper directly behind him. "It doesn't hurt." He spun around. Nothing. The voice was a memory. Lily Ann Weatherby's last thought before the silence. He ran north, towards the river. He didn't care about the paths anymore. He crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at his face. The chorus in his head grew louder, a cacophony of lost souls. He fought to hold onto his own thoughts, his own name. Elias Thorne, photographer. I am Elias Thorne. The forest answered him with a wave of sensation, the feeling of an acorn taking root, the slow decay of a fallen log over a century, the patient, silent growth of bark over a wound. Time was losing its meaning, stretching and compressing. He stumbled and fell, his hands sinking into the soft, damp earth. The ground felt warm. It pulsed with a slow, steady beat, a heartbeat the size of a forest. He pushed himself up, his hands covered in dirt. The cut on his foot no longer hurt. He felt strong, vital. He reached the river. It was real, a ribbon of churning gray water. Freedom. He scrambled down the embankment, his boots slipping in the mud. He was almost there. He stopped at the water's edge. He saw his reflection. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dark. But around his pupils, the irises were shot through with fine, green filaments. And when he looked closer, he saw that the lines on his face, the crow's feet, the frown lines, were arranging themselves into patterns. The intricate, horrifying patterns of bark. He was a seed, and he was starting to sprout. He recoiled from the water's edge in horror. The thought of leaving, of the noise and the concrete and the frantic, lonely existence of the city now felt alien, unbearable. A new feeling rose within him, drowning out the fear, a profound sense of peace, a sense of coming home. The chorus in his head quieted, replaced by a single, immense, silent consciousness. The forest, it wasn't angry, it wasn't evil, it was just vast, and it was lonely. It saw his frantic, panicked individuality as a wound, a sickness, and it wanted to make him whole. It wanted to heal him by erasing him. This is the climax. He understood everything in a single, paralyzing instant. The missing people weren't dead, they were here. Their bodies had fed the roots, their minds woven into the fabric of the forest's memory. The faces were the last echoes of their struggle, the final, futile protest of the I before it was subsumed into the we. He wasn't going to be a victim. He was going to be an ingredient. He looked back at the forest. It was no longer a collection of individual trees. He saw it as it truly was, a single, massive organism connected by a neural network of roots, thinking thoughts that took centuries to complete. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was calling him. The desire to run was gone, replaced by an urge to lie down, to sleep, to join the quiet hum. He stumbled back towards the clearing with the great redwood, the monument of faces. He walked with a strange, shambling gait, his joints stiffening. His skin felt tight, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached the colossal tree and placed a hand on its trunk. He felt a jolt, a final, massive influx of shared memory. He saw the world through the forest's eyes. He saw geologic time, the slow crawl of glaciers, the rise and fall of species. He saw the first humans, small, fleeting creatures, and felt the forest's curiosity as it touched their strange, loud, singular minds. It had learned to plant them, to quiet them, to make their brief, painful song part of its eternal silence. This was not murder. This was preservation. An act of incomprehensible, terrifying compassion. He slid down to the base of the tree, his back against the bark. He felt his own consciousness, his memories of the city, his artistic ambitions, his name, all of it felt thin, brittle, a photograph fading in the sun. He looked down at his hands. The skin was hardening, turning gray and rough. His fingers were stiffening, fusing together. Tiny green shoots were sprouting from his nail beds. The transformation was beginning. The final scream of his individuality was silent, internal. "I am Elias Thorne." The forest hummed back, "You are home." The sun began to set, casting long, golden rays through the canopy. Elias sat motionless, his head tilted back against the tree. He was no longer fighting. The peace was absolute. The cacophony of one was being replaced by the symphony of all. He could feel his own memories being archived. The taste of coffee, the feeling of a lover's touch, the sting of failure. They were being drained from him, stored away in the vast library of the marrow root. He was becoming a footnote in a story that had no end. His body was becoming rigid. The roots of the great redwood were extending from the ground, fine, white tendrils that were starting to weave themselves into the fabric of his clothes, into his skin. They didn't pierce him. They merged with him. His camera lay on the ground a few feet away, forgotten. The lens was pointed at him. Its little red recording light, which he had accidentally triggered during his fall, blinked steadily. It was capturing the final, silent moments of Elias Thorne. His face was losing its slackness. The muscles were pulling taut, his mouth opening slightly, his brow furrowing. Not in response to any feeling he was having now, he felt nothing but peace, but as a final, physical echo of the man he used to be. The ambitious, fearful, obsessive man. His skin was taking on the texture of bark. Weeks later, the forest is quiet. The cabin is empty, the door slightly ajar, swinging in the breeze. Nature is already reclaiming it. The camera is still there, half covered by leaves. The battery died long ago. Its final recorded file is safe on the memory card, a silent testament. The shot shifts to the great redwood. To an observer, nothing has changed. But for one who knows where to look, there is a new addition to the collage of faces on its trunk. It's near the bottom, just above the twisting roots. It's a man's face, gaunt. His eyes are wide and his mouth is open, as if in a scream. But if you look closely into the wooden eyes, there is no terror there, only a vast, silent, and eternal emptiness. The face of Elias Thorne has joined the choir, and the forest hums content.